Okay, so let's widen the debate now by raising the big questions. Modi versus Macaulay. Was Prime Minister Modi wrong to target Thomas Macaulay for introducing English language to Indian education? Has English education inculcated modern values or created a colonial mindset? Has English education grown at the expense of Indian culture and languages? Is Modi's attack on Macaulay about politics or culture? India versus Bharat, is it a false binary? Joining me now, special guest, Professor Rakesh Sinha, author and former MP, and also Professor Shruti Kapila, Professor of History and Politics at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Suraj Yengde, he's been a scholar at Harvard and Oxford, writes on Dalit issues in particular. And Professor Aditya Mukherjee, one of India's most distinguished historians. Appreciate all of you joining us. Why don't you take it, Professor Shruti Kapila, first. Let's get a woman voice right at the outset. Tell me whether you believe that this is a false binary, India versus Bharat, Modi versus Macaulay, or as William Dalrymple suggests, it's the best of both worlds, or as Amish Tripathi suggests, India's mindset has got colonized over the years and we need to decolonize it.
I mean, I think all of it is true in some senses, given that I think British colonization had a profound and deep and irreversible change on modern life, and particularly India. It was, after all, a very kind of the main, as it were, part of the British Empire. So I wouldn't want to say, but having said that, I would say that whether it is, as it were, right-wing historians or left-wing historians or, centrist historians, there's no getting away from the categories of modern knowledge systems that were put into place about 200 or 300 years ago. So history writing, knowledge, whether the idea of India or the idea of Bharat, they're now going to be inflected by what happened in the last 200 to 300 years. And we will have...
Did we lose touch with our traditional sciences, our traditional knowledge? Ayurveda was an example that Amish Tripathi gave.
I mean, sure, that's a no-brainer. I mean, the thing is that modern life, as we understand it, whether it is, capital, economy, whether it is knowledge, science, or whether it is indeed government, because the thing about Macaulay's minute is that it comes in the 1830s, which is the birth of liberalism in the world. It's the birth of modern governance, modern state structures, the separation of power, all the things that we understand by modern government and bureaucracy, they're all laid down. In fact, India is the laboratory, if I can use that word, for these modern governance systems, which are then exported back to London. And that way, so the English language question is at the heart of, as it were, a radical change in statecraft, in education, in knowledge. And yes, there's nothing to, say yes or no on. I mean, this cannot be a fight. Whether it was Sanskrit knowledge systems or whether it was Mughal imperial systems, they were absolutely misshapen, retranslated, recategorized, and some of them were even killed off with the arrival of modern knowledge systems and which came with the freight of British colonization. And I just want to say one more thing. One more thing I do want to say, that there was a very uneven uptake of English education in India. Suraj is here. I'm sure he will speak to that as well later, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But what is interesting is that, the British go through a kind of mood swings with policy. So in the initial 30, 40 years, there's a kind of Indomania. So everything is Persian. In fact, William Dalrymple wrote White Mughals. I mean, that very idea that, they had to kind of conform to kind of Indian systems, that gives way in the early 1800s after empire is more kind of, settled, if I can say, if the country has been pacified, the big wars have been won. And that's really when, the English question comes on the table and new systems. And interestingly, it was actually Hindu upper castes who were the first enthusiastic, as it were, takers of English education.
That's an interesting point to take to you, Professor Rakesh Sinha. This was a process, this was a period of time wherein modern ideas were being brought to the world. And as Shruti Kapila puts it, among those who bought into the ideas, I will add the Parsis to the Hindu upper caste. They saw this as their way of social advancement. Now the Prime Minister seems to be creating some kind of a war between English language or English speakers and those who profess to focus on indigenous languages, when you can easily have the best of both worlds. And many Indians do.
I am surprised to see the hypocrisy of the Western intellectuals, those who are westernized or are still colonized. When Gogoi Wa Thyong, the African thinker, a writer and novelist, says that English had damaged the African culture, that Ubuntu, you are because I am because you are. This is the Ubuntu culture, which we had Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya. He says that language is not merely the mode of communication, it also carries the culture. And he wrote in 1977, The Decolonizing Mind. That is a path breaking in the field of the linguistic politics of the world. Therefore, I consider that what Prime Minister says is a very true, he touches the reality which has been ignored for decades and decades by the Congress and Nehruvian regime. What I want to communicate
what is it that troubles you most? Professor Rakesh Sinha, what is it that troubles you most? What is it that troubles you most about this so-called colonized mind?
No, you don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, what trouble me? What does not trouble me? That is not the question. Let me complete my point of view.
Please
you have
do.
not intervened there. You see, the English is a language. English is a language. We don't hate any language. English is a language. It has a contribution. The discourse in modern discourse, it has a vital contribution. But my question is that introduction of the English and the hegemony of the English in India. What contribution Indians made by utilizing English? Any fundamental contribution in social science? We became the subordination to the Western intellectuals. And what subaltern says and what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, there is a common ground. Europe is a province. English is one of the languages.
Right.
The way it was explained that English has introduced everything in India. Without English, India was nothing. India would have been nothing. So I consider that the Indian languages, Rajdeep, there is one important issue that due to domination of the English, the vernacular intellectuals, so the vernacular is a very derogatory term now, Indian languages intellectuals have been suppressed. The intellectuals in Malayali, intellectuals in Kannada language, intellectuals in Odia language, intellectuals in Bengali language. The Gitanjali was written in Bengali. He got the name and fame all over the world. So it is misnomer. The cosmopolitan, the idea of cosmopolitanism was Rabindranath Tagore. It is not, we have not borrowed from any British
you make a good, okay, you make a good point. Rakesh, you make a good point. Let me take that to Professor Mukherjee.
Let me complete. Let me just give me 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Okay,
I am
10
just
seconds.
10 seconds. What Franz Fanon said about the colonialism is not a system. It is not a thinking pattern. It should be erased from bottom. Everything should, no vestige should remain because it inspires the people to become imitators. Right from 1947, Aditya Mukherjee is here. We are textbook writers. Everything is coming from the West. They said globalization. They betrayed the globalization. Entire Indian intellectuals were for globalization because the Europe has given the concept of globalization. It is America and Europe. They betrayed the globalization. They said postmodernism.
You made your point. You're saying so we've created an imitative culture.
Our own legs.
You've created an imitative culture. We haven't stood on our own feet as a result. Aditya Mukherjee, respond to what you've just heard.
You see this, that the colonial mindset that Macaulay represents needs to be opposed is obvious. But to say that Mr. Modi is now going to do it in the next 10 years is to reinvent the wheel, is to appropriate what others have already done, is to say, is it something like what Kangana Rao said, independence came only in 2014, 47 mein to bheek mili thi hame. Since the 19th century, since Macaulay, the Indian thinkers have been critiquing colonialism in a manner which is absolutely amazing. The early nationalists created the most comprehensive economic critique of imperialism way before Marx and Lenin and Hobson. So we have this whole tradition from Naroji, Ranade, Gokhale, G.V. Joshi, R.C. Dutt. It is people who were not part of this anti-colonial struggle who now are telling us that we should decolonize.
So you're saying the Bharat versus India debate is a false binary? It's a false debate being created for politics and not about really about any cultural war out there?
It's the language. You see, when you put the central issue as the language, you're making a very big mistake. Our tallest nationalist leaders, who were educated, which is an important thing these days, were educated in English, and many of them in England. Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, Patel were educated in England, but they did not pick up colonial values from there. That language brings English language has brought, as somebody said a little while ago, Enlightenment values is rubbish. There are alternate routes to modernity. Way before Enlightenment in Europe, Akbar in the 16th century is talking of reason, rationality, he's talking of universal religion. He's holding in his court debates of between Christian priests, Muslim Maulvis and Hindu priests. You know, so there is, so who is said? Rammohn Roy writes his seminal piece, Tuhafat, before he learnt English. He did it on the basis of his knowledge of Sanskrit and Persian. So it's not language that is the issue. It is whether you are picking up what is colonial from the West, or whether you are picking up what is modern, what is new, what is progressive.
I have to intervene.
You know, I'll let you in a moment, but let Suraj Yengde respond, because Suraj, you know, the notion of modernity, and Ambedkar writes about it and has spoken about it, actually in a way it freed and unshackled many of the backward caste groups, many of the Dalits in particular, which hadn't happened in a sense before the 18th century, where the caste system was as rigid as ever. So in a way, the unshackling of many of the caste boundaries in particular opened up as a result of exposure to this modern education. I'm not using the word English, but modern values. Do you agree?
Yeah, thank you, Rajdip. It's good to see you. And I agree with almost everyone who has contributed, from William to Professor Mukherjee here. And the agreement is almost, you know, we have to find a balance, which of course you're also advocating. Now the question is, it's not about Macaulay per se. So if we reduce Macaulay to something of a colonial hangover, then where do we go? Do we go to Manu? And so the question is not necessarily Modi versus Macaulay, is it Manu versus Macaulay? And if you go back to the values of Manu, we are back to square one, which really challenges the ethos of Indian constitution and democracy. Now, let me tell you, with English language that we have, the way Ashish Nandi, as you have pointed out, as a cricket is an Indian game, so English has also undergone its own formulation. So Indian English is different than British English. So when I went to England way back in 2011, I wrote an essay in English, and my professor in the UK couldn't really surmise the argument, because I was educated in a state medium English school, as opposed to those international or central board English education, which is heavily subsidized by the cultural capital of the West, as opposed to the state medium English schools, which really give you both of the two worlds. And now, for example, if we really have to decolonize, we really fall into a very riskier trap. Do we go back to the hegemonic ideals of Brahminical hierarchy? Or, and I agree with Prime Minister Modi, who was saying in his speech with reference to Macaulay, that the younger generation doesn't look it as our heritage, but it just looks at mortars and bricks, which I appreciate. However, we need to have an insertion of a rationalistic thought. And around the same time, 1835, when minutes were written, about the same time and 2 years later, James Prinsep deciphers Brahmi script that gives rise to this huge canvas of Buddhist economy of philosophies that are just that are just available. And so what we see here, English medium education has given rise to elites that are also what we call now English medium Hindutva, which is, the president of BJP himself went to this English medium school, JP Nadda, getting educated, and the people who are opposing English language, which I appreciate, without really accounting their own complicity in this, where their children are studying here abroad, where I am at, in UK and other parts of the world.
That's interesting, because I'll come to you, Shruti, in a moment, but Rakesh Sinha, it's all very well to, in a way, pitch English language as part of this colonial mindset which has been built. But the truth of the matter is English is aspirational. Everyone wants to send their children to English medium schools, and you can easily achieve a balance. you can easily get the best of indigenous education and also have English. It's about values. It's not about what language you speak, but the kind of values you espouse. So if you espouse the values of Manu, then surely you have no place in this new India, surely.
Before coming to this question, you raised that the Dalit liberation and English helped that. Jyotiba Phule was not well versed in English. Narayan Guru was not well versed in English. These two people had worked in a very vitalized the Dalit progress and empowerment. So don't give credit to the English language for the empowerment of the Dalits. In fact, English had been.
Suraj is nodding. Just a minute. Suraj is shaking his head, and Shruti, you don't agree with that? That here
it's
is
not
Rakesh Sinha saying.
Correct. It's not factually correct, but that's okay.
Go ahead.
Let me complete. Yes. And I'm also surprised that you are reducing Prime Minister's speech to just an English language. He has not opposed the English language. What he wants to say that there should be progress of the Indian languages, the heritage we have in the Indian languages. And I'm also surprised at Aditya Mukherjee's version. He's just creating a politics in Prime Minister's philosophy of decolonization. He's rejecting, in fact, the entire subalterns school, their comrades. Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Chakravarti S.P. Bach, all of the people saying that Orientalist, later on the post-colonial discourse, that they are emphasizing that the progress of the idea is not possible unless until the local languages are given importance. It is not the question of India, it is the question of the world
so you're saying,
point of view.
Unlike
language,
Japan,
one province.
You're saying unlike a Japan.
Europe is not the globe.
Okay, Shruti Kapila, unlike a Japan or a South Korea, and these were examples. Just a minute, sir.
No,
just a minute.
Three people are.
No, they're not against you. It's not three against one.
Why should give me time, or I should?
No, 1 minute, sir.
You give me time. Four people are speaking the same. Why raising various issues? Let me complete.
You finish your point. I'll give you 30 seconds more. Go ahead. Complete your view.
No, what I want to say that for the last more than 7 decades, our heritage, even our manuscripts, remain untranslated, not translated. They're not read. We have almost 1 crore manuscript. 1 lakh Indian manuscripts are outside the country. It is the Prime Minister Narendra Modi is doing. I'm giving just one example. I'm finishing what is it. Mohan Ranade was arrested in Goa Mukti Andolan. He was sent to, by Nehruvian regime, during that regime, he was sent to the Lesman and for 25 years prison. And we have liberated or freed 3,700 Portuguese army. We have not asked for Mohan Ranade. So this is the question of the decolonization of mind. When we say that we should stand our own legs, this does not mean we should reject the Europe. This does not mean we should reject the English.
I've
we
heard you
have
now.
the common ground. We have the equal footing.
I've heard you. Let Shruti Kapila respond. You see, there could be a point in what both Rakesh Sinha are suggesting that, look, Japan, Korea, China, these are examples the Prime Minister gave, that they have pride in their local language of a level that we don't have in this country. There are those who say even local histories was changed by the British to suit their imperial agenda, and therefore this is a process of course correction. What the Prime Minister is doing is a process of course correction. Do you agree?
I haven't, I'm afraid, heard the Prime Minister's speech, but I think this is a long-standing debate in scholarship. This is a debate that has been raging for as long as colonization. So, I mean, there will be, new interpretations. I think today, the question is what next? I do think every generation must, as it were, grapple with the imperial past, make something of it, and how they may, it's interesting that Professor Sinha wants to sort of lump the British with the Nehruvian elite, as well as say, Professor Mukherjee, who, like Bipin Chandra, would argue that what was special about the Indian educated elite of that generation was actually to become a nationalist elite, which was to say not to do the bidding of the empire. Now, these are really long-standing debates about what do you do with the English language? But there is no getting away from the fact that English is the language of power. It is the language of mobility. It is the language, therefore, also of aspiration. The question today is that there is something that has happened with globalization, in which, whether it is China, you mentioned China, but there is a critique of, as it were, Western liberalism that first comes from actually Chinese intellectuals, which I think 10 years later, we are seeing similar debates coming up in India. And I think there is and finally, I just want to say that there is a global antipathy to liberal metropolitan elites. I mean, that's the case now in Britain. That is the case in America. So I think that those issues are, as it were, I think global, and they speak to the crisis or a turning point in liberal democracy. They're not simply about what happened to the British Empire, what Macaulay did, or what the English language means. It can be no one's case that this is malevolent hypocrisy when people are teaching their children, getting their children educated in English, to then now insist on a language which is not going to lead to mobility. It is not the language of global science. It is not the language of global governance. So why would you want to take one major skill that Indians actually have? And as Suraj has pointed out, and many others have pointed out, Indian English is its own thing. I mean, we have totally recolonized it as our own language, with its own diction, with its own meaning, even its own grammar. So I don't understand what this debate is. I actually don't understand what the debate is. There's not much disagreement.
But there is a
Sinha.
there is a political.
English is not the.
Yeah, go ahead, Rakesh. Go ahead.
Yes, it is just merely advocacy of English in post-colonial societies. You go to France, there is no English. You go to Australia, there's a different kind of English. You go to China, not one country. You are targeting the post-colonial societies. You want to grab them and keeping them under the shade of the European hegemony. We want to liberate ourselves from the hegemony of the
Just a minute, sir. I've heard both of you. Let Aditya and Suraj also get a chance. Aditya Mukherjee, you were not. Just a minute. I'll give you time. Aditya Mukherjee, you were shaking. No, sir. 1 minute.
No, one question. Let me raise the one question. I'm raising just a question, not I'm giving a lecture. I'm raising the question. Yes, there is English. English, your advocacy of English, I accept that. But just tell me what English has contributed in the Indian social sciences, except writing textbooks.
Okay, let Aditya Mukherjee respond to that.
Fundamental work we could have done. What is the contribution of English?
Aditya Mukherjee, what has English contributed? What is the contribution of English to social sciences? And is this a wider crisis of liberal democracy, as Shruti Kapila suggests, that the Prime Minister is reflecting the rise of a new kind of an elite, challenging the old elite? This is a battle of two elites, a new elite versus an old elite.
The Prime Minister, apart from talking of the language issue, talked of the removal of the colonial mindset. All right? As I have already said on the language issue, there is no doubt that indigenous languages must also grow, and every anti-imperialist focused on that, from Tilak to Gandhi to just name them, all of them had their newspapers. Tilak had Maratha, Gandhi wrote in Hindi and Gujarati, Naroji had Rast Goftar in Gujarati, and so on and so forth. That's not the only issue. The other issue is the colonial mindset. The biggest colonial mindset, which comes with Macaulay and slightly before Macaulay through James Mill, is that the Indian civilization is divided into two nations, the Hindus and the Muslims. The whole communal ideology emerges from the colonial mindset, right? And that is what is being promoted, and we are not fighting against it. The biggest colonial mindset is to defend imperialism. The module that was made by the NCR Partition Horrors Day just 2 months ago, in that they give a clean chit to the British, saying that the British wanted to leave a united India right through, and the chief culprit.
You again make value. That's it's
this
interesting.
Is the ironies
and the hypocrisies. Okay, I want to give Suraj the...
Anti-Modism is his agenda.
No, 1 minute.
Very important issue we are debating, Mr. Aditya Mukherjee. We are not
I want
debating.
Suraj Yengde, put the volume down.
are
Suraj,
reducing-
you should get the final word. Suraj, the final word. Is this a wider debate between the old elites and the new elites? And in some way, a debate that should be had. Nothing wrong with it.
I think it is, and it's a very enriching conversation, Rajdip. This panel itself is quite diverse, and I agree in a way that I am also in favor of going back to the native roots. But the point is, where is that anchor? Where is that core that we are going to find out? And Rakesh had incorrectly stated that Phule was not well versed in English. I mean, his commissions and all were written in English. Though I take his point, I think it's what he is really pointing out, which is really the challenge that the post-colonial elites brought forth, which is the whole project of decolonization. And now the right world over is claiming on to the idea of decolonization. My reservations with these debates is, what do we do with the existent topography of language and knowledge that is there? Now, if you ask anybody, what medium of instructions would you send your child into? Anybody, and this is me talking, in Nanded, for example, and they would most likely say English language. I'll tell you an example. At Harvard, I met a student who was enrolled in an English studies department, and he was from Karnataka, and he was taking lessons in Karnataka in Kannada language at Harvard. And because his education, though he grew up in Karnataka in one of those posh boarding schools, and I looked at it and I was like, how tragic that is. But that is what this new elite has provided us and really made us look inferior. And what happens is the standards of English that we are measuring against each other, and here the citation of Fanon is really important, and I'm amazed, how that Fanon gets appropriated and smacked on the face. We really need to think about, what does this culture of language give us as an outcome?
Right.
What I think it essentially does is that if we are able to decolonize and de-Brahminize, if we are able to sanitize this with the elements of this aristocratic elite, as well as the complicits, the satraps that were here, 565 princely states existed, they were in British suzerainty. What kind of decolonization are we talking about? So these people, for nearly 200 years, were in the protection, who are now reclaimed as nationalist heroes. That history is so messier, and everybody almost who were complicit ruling class have their hands in bloods, not just the British.
That's a wonderful way to put it there, Suraj. And I think you've given us, as have all our panelists, a debate which has truly enlightened us. I hope to see many more such debates on television, done without noise and done without confrontation. Because I think the genius of this country is its ability to assimilate different ideas and then move forward. Not necessarily pit Modi versus Macaulay, as we started at the outset within the debate, but find ways in which we can achieve the best of the old order and the best of the new order and take that forward. I thank you all very much for joining me here on this special debate. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind. Namaskar.